It's good to be back. This is an exciting time. I haven't had this much fun in a training camp in a long time. I can't remember the last time I've had this much fun being around a group of guys. We have come together closer and closer each day. I don't think I've been around a closer group of guys either, and they'd be the first to tell you that. And so I'm really excited to watch them play. I'm excited, as every year you get to the point in training camp where you're just so sick and tired of hitting each other. You go through the entire spring practice and then pretty much the entire training camp, and all you're doing is playing against Texas. And so we finally, the last week and a half or so, have started preparing for our first game, our first opponent, and gotten some work against the scout team. And so just excited at the trajectory that we're on. We've been fortunate to have, other than a few key linebackers, we've been fairly injury-free, which is to say something pretty positively about our strength and conditioning staff, considering how hard, physical, tough our training camps always are. I think our freshmen, whether they were here in the spring or during the summer, you're going to see a lot of them play because they deserve it, because they have earned it, and they're some of the best on our team at what they do. Really excited about our captains. The announcement a couple days ago for those guys. I know, Andrew Beck being elected for the second year in a row. Christopher Nelson is kind of if you'd have told me 6 months ago that this guy was a captain, I'd have said no way, because he doesn't say a whole lot, at least in front of coaches. And that's why I think it's really important that you have your team vote, because Chris was the leading vote getter, much like Puna Ford was the leading vote getter last year. And so although he may not say much in front of us coaches, it's obvious that he's leading off the field and he's leading in the locker room. And then, to have Brecken Hager be one of only 3 father and son combinations in the history of Texas football to be captains is pretty unique. And then obviously, Elijah Rodriguez and Anthony Wheeler are 2 of our, just do right all the time guys that guys really listen to. I think, we feel extremely good about our quarterback situation. Sam has certainly embraced being the starting quarterback and has had a good week of practice. Shane Buechele, to his credit, what a team guy. He is. He's gone out and competed every day. I think he understands that he loves this team very, very much, and that the odds and chances of his number being called at some point, whether it be the first game, second game, whenever, that the odds are very high that his number is going to be called, and he's going to be ready if his number is called, and then the 2 young guys can continue to develop. So exciting time. Obviously, we're 5 days away from kickoff, which is something that we've looked forward to really since we got back from Christmas break in January. Questions?
Coach, I remember after the opener last year, one of the takeaways was, these guys are thinking a little too much, not just letting loose. How different is it for these guys now with the year under their belt? Do you expect them to be letting it loose right from the jump?
I do expect that, yeah. I think, an incredible amount of instability when we got here. You're talking about 3 head coaches in 4 years, 4 athletic directors in 4.5 years, and, 2 presidents. And then you couple that with a 3-year stretch where there were 10 different assistant coaches that were funneled in and out. And so this is also the first time, I believe, in 5 years, John, that we've gone back-to-back seasons with the same offense. First time in 5 years, that these kids have been able to take a deep breath and say, okay, I know what this is. I know what this means. I'm not learning a new language. And so I think the element of familiarity, the element of stability, and then the element of the confidence in their level of training will allow them to play a lot more loose.
Tom, 2 questions. Nationally, it feels like everyone has let's just wait and see what happens with Texas. No one's talking.
I would.
Y'all. What's that?
I would.
Yeah. So that's what I want to ask you. Is that kind of fair right now? Because
Yes.
normally this program is like super ridiculous expectations, but everyone's kind of, let's just see what happens. Is
Fair. Yes.
Okay. Any elaboration on that? I mean,
No, I mean, you are what your record says you are.
Yeah.
Right. And we went 7-6 last year, and until we step out on the field and play a game, everything from our last game until now says that, we are the last iteration of what you saw us. Do I feel confident in the fact that we've improved and developed? Do our kids, our players, our coaches, the people in that building feel confident that we have developed? Absolutely. But if I was Joe Fan, I would feel the same way.
And then talking about the stability, looking at the depth chart, there weren't a lot of surprises. And I got to think that in your mind, that's a good thing. That you guys kind of know what you have and you know what you got. And going forward.
There weren't. I mean, obviously we had the quarterback battle. There was, a battle at offensive tackle. I think, boundary safety was a bit of a battle, but beyond that, I think we kind of knew who our guys were, especially the ones. I think the biggest battles that occurred throughout training camp were the battles that occurred between whether I'm going to be a 3 or a 2, or a 2 that only goes in if the 1 gets hurt, or am I a 2 that goes in on a rotational basis, or am I a guy just trying to make the plane trip to Maryland. I think that's where a lot of the quote-unquote battles that you saw, emerge, because the depth chart was fairly solidified because we had quite a bit of returners.
Hey, Coach. When you look at your depth chart, I believe it's probably you're going to have 19 of your 22 are going to be upperclassmen, starters. What does that mean from a physical maturity standpoint, maybe a mental maturity standpoint, and just talk about, do you feel like you can lean on this large group of upperclassmen?
Yeah, I didn't realize that, but that's, I think any coach would tell you that you'd rather have it that way than the other way, than the 19 be underclassmen. So I think college football is a game of development and experience. There's very, very few impact freshmen that come in, especially when you get outside the skill positions on both sides of the football. And so that requires physical and mental maturity and development. But then there is no substitute for experience either. And these guys have been through a lot, these upperclassmen, and they've seen what not to do. They've seen what gets you beat, and they've also seen how to win against some very good football teams too. So I think that is a sign that that we're headed in the right direction when you can. Now we've got to get it to the point where our numbers in our different classes, and we're addressing it. It feels like daily, but at least, weekly, about, leveling out some of these classes so that you don't get a year or two where you're upperclassmen heavy, and then a year or two where you're lowerclassmen heavy, and you start this vicious cycle. You've got to start evening those classes out of key contributors. But, you know, I went through, this is an amazing, I didn't write it down, so I hope I don't forget anybody, but if you think about this, we signed 18 kids in the, whatever it was, Anwar, you write for one of the recruiting publications, 31st ranked class in the country in 2017. 18 kids, one of them had to medically disqualify, and Mikey Grandy. And you look, and I think we counted within 2 years. So 2 years from that signing class, I think we counted 12 starters or key contributors. You're talking about Daniel Young, Cade Brewer, Derek Kerstetter, I know I'm going to forget some here, but Taquan Graham, Marquez Bimage, Josh Thompson, Kobe Boyce is our third corner right now. Who am I forgetting? Gary Johnson was in that class. I said Josh already. We Kerstetter, I said. Reese Leto is going to contribute this year. Tennille Carter was in that class. Sam Ellinger was in that class. And so you're talking about 12 out of 17 guys that stayed healthy of that class that'll be starters or key contributors. And so it's just a tremendous credit to the development in the weight room by our strength staff, the development on the field from our coaching staff, and the very calculated approach that we took to that 2017 class by our recruiting staff as well.
Tom, one of the very few oars on the depth chart is kicker. What do Dicker and Rowland have to do this week to get...
Say it again, I'm sorry.
Excuse me. What do Dicker and Rowland have to do this week to get that job, or might we see them both against Maryland?
I don't think you'll see both. I don't. I think, you know, it's going to come down to really just a couple days here, and they're fairly neck and neck. And, you know, the guy that, you know, makes the most pressure kicks here in the next couple days will be the guy that jogs out against Maryland.
Tom, what are you most confident about, and what are your biggest concerns going into Saturday?
Probably most confident about the continuity of our defense and the experience that we have there. But at the same time, probably the biggest concern would be the depth at linebacker, especially with Anthony Wheeler being suspended for the first half. And then probably, if that's 1A, then 1B would be, you know, our backup offensive, the depth at offensive line. I think our starting five are playing at a level that we haven't seen around here in a while, but we've got to continue to get better with the few key guys that are a, you know, broken shoelace or a helmet popped off or a sprained ankle away from going in.
Tom, by nature of your camp, you're playing against each other. Guy makes a play, maybe a guy didn't make a play. How much is it we think we know but we don't know because of the fact that it's always against each other going into an opener?
Yeah, a lot. I mean, it's, or should I say some? You guys didn't get that. But it does factor in that you're playing against each other, and you've got to determine as a coach, you know, whether, and I think that's why we've got, you know, whatever it is, 100 years experience between our 10 coaches, over 100 years, that you say, okay, no, that was a really good play by the defense, or, man, that was a really bad play by the offense, or vice versa. Oh, my God, did you see that catch that kid made? Yeah, I know, it was unbelievable coverage. That kid just made an unbelievable play. Or that play was blocked extremely well, and one guy shed a block at the last minute to make the play for a 1 yard gain. Then, you know, there's ways to evaluate that as a coach, but I don't think you'll truly know until you're playing against somebody else.
Tom, it's obviously, a veteran-heavy defense, but, on that two deep, there seems to be a lot of freshmen, and I think, Kobe redshirt freshman. Does that give you any cause for concern at all that, these are inexperienced guys that are going to have to step in if somebody gets injured or underperforms, or are these guys that you brought in do they seem like a different breed from the typical freshman?
Our practices are so game-like, that I really, and some of these true freshmen, a lot of the true freshmen that are in the two deep were here in the spring, too. So they've had a spring practice, spring game. They've had winter off season, all of that stuff. So, and then some of those guys, like you mentioned, Kobe Boyce and some of the redshirt freshmen that are in the two deep. Yeah, would you like them to have game experience? Certainly. There's no substitute for that. No substitute. But I do feel confident that the way that we train our guys, that they'll be ready should they be needed.
Coach, you talked about knowing who your guys were pretty much at most positions. When did you know that Sam was going to be the guy? Was it when you made the announcement, or because you said you can win with both of them? So what was it that he did that kind of jumped out? And did you know beforehand?
Didn't know beforehand. Shane made it very difficult to make that decision. Probably the hardest decision that I've had to make as a head coach and coordinator. We went through something very similar at Ohio State when Braxton Miller went down, and we had to decide between J.T. Barrett and Cardell Jones, and neither of them did anything wrong. Neither of them proved that you can't win with them. In fact, the opposite is true, and the same with our guys in Sam and Shane. They both proved that you can win with them. And so I think it was just a matter of us as a coaching staff collectively. Obviously, we asked all the coaches. I think the defensive guys have a big input in that, the defensive coaches. You ask them, who would you least like to play against, and what style. I think that has input. But ultimately, there were going to be two guys that make that decision, and it's going to be Tim Beck and myself, with his vote counting as one and my vote counting as two. So I think just the experience that we have, saying, okay, game one, who gives us the best, not the only, but the best chance to win the game starting, and we decided it was Sam.
Coach, among all the skill position guys on offense, who had that camp this month that just blew you away? If you had to name one guy that made you say, this guy's definitely going to have an impact this season.
Of the skill position
Yeah.
guys on offense?
Yeah.
Are we counting tight ends? No?
Sure, why not?
Well, obviously having three capable bodies there, and that's not to discredit, the guys that played that position last year. Kendall Moore did an admirable job for us when he had to, and Cade Brewer was a 222-pound wide receiver that started a bunch of games there too. So, but to have Andrew's leadership and toughness combined with Cade's physical development and route running ability and ball skills, and then behind them is Reese Lato, a redshirt freshman that you wouldn't blink an eye if he were to go in the game. You'd feel okay if he went in the game. I think I'm excited about that. The guy that stands out obviously is L.J. Humphrey. This is a guy that he's a Swiss Army knife, right? I mean, he can line up as a running back. He can line up as a quarterback. He can line up as a wing tight end, if you will. He can line up in the slot. He can line up as outside receiver. He can run option routes over the middle. He can run deep. He can run post. He can run crossing routes. He's got great ball skills. He's not going to run by you. He's not going to beat you in a track race by any stretch, but he's definitely a guy that we'll certainly lean on. And there's others, and I hate singling out, because I do feel like there's a lot of guys that if they perform the way that they've performed throughout training camp, would certainly maybe turn some heads.
Speaking of Little Jordan and Gary Johnson and Chris Boyd, I would think are three of your elite players. Were you surprised none of them were chosen to be captains on the team?
Wasn't surprised because we were gonna. So here's how it went, Kirk. This is interesting. So we gave the team a ballot, and the ballot probably had all, if not most, seniors, had a few key juniors, and then even fewer key sophomores. And we put their GPAs up there, and we put their status, crimson, green, and gold, and we put kind of their on-the-field accomplishments, started 12 games, blah, 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 and that's on the ballot, okay? And so you're allowed to pick 4. Well, those ballots come in. This is the first time it's ever happened to me. So the ballots come in, and we had about 11 or 12 guys that were all clustered right around 5 to 6 to 7 votes, and you're talking about a roster of 110 times 4 votes, so that's, 440 votes. And you had about 11 or 12 guys that were all clustered within, a handful of votes. So what we did, we took the top 12 vote getters, and we had a revote. And so now, to eliminate the one-offs, a guy voting for a buddy just to put something on there, he wasn't taking it seriously or whatever. And so even then, my plan was to only have 4, and then Elijah Rodriguez, and was in there, within 1 vote, and I thought it fair. But both Chris, and Gary finished very, very close to that, and we would consider them, they're both on our leadership council, but you got to draw the line somewhere, and you're not going to have 12 captains. But I consider the 12 or 14 guys that are on our leadership council, they're all equals.
You deserve to be ranked. You're ranking
I don't know. I don't. Yeah. Deserve. We'll talk about what we deserve in January. I take that back. We'll talk about what we've earned in January.
Coach, you were talking a little bit about your tight ends earlier, and you came in last year talking about how big of a part of your offense the tight end is, and it was kind of eliminated last year, especially the offensive, throwing the ball to them a lot. Is 10 throws a game to your tight end something you're looking at between those 3 guys, or what exactly are you looking for from those guys?
Again, I don't get to call the defenses, and so I always find it fascinating that, well, you only threw the ball to the so-and-so twice in this game. I know. The defense coordinator double covered him all game. It's like, but we threw it to this guy 15 because they single covered him the whole game. And so I don't know. I don't know what the answer is to that. I know they're very capable, and when the opportunity presents itself based on the defensive call and the offensive call, that they'll get their fair share of touches.
Yeah, Tom, before last season's opener, the fan base was cautiously optimistic. This year they're even more optimistic with the preseason ranking. Why will this opener be different than last year?
I would say, again, continuity, familiarity, the closeness of this team, the stability within our staff, the added year of physical development from our strength staff. I mean, there's a reason. There's a reason that adages get formed, right? Adages get formed because there's usually a lot of data or whatever you want to call it to back that up. And the adage is, teams usually make the most improvement from game 1 to game 2, and programs usually make the most improvement from year 1 to year 2. So I would expect us to make some improvement. Now, again, I don't have a crystal ball. I don't know who's going to get hurt. I don't know. Again, we got to get hit in the mouth too. That's something that we talk about very often because of how happy the team is right now, how excited they are to be here, how they've embraced and bought into the culture and have gone so hard in training camp. And everything's great right now. But, what are we going to do when we get down 10 points in Washington, D.C., if we do? What are we going to do when, another team, decides that, they came to play too? And so that's something that we constantly talk about. But to your original question, I think there's just so many more positive things that you can do in a year and 9 months versus 9 months. And the biggest being stability and continuity.
Tom, what do you think of the fair catch rule on the kickoffs? How do you think it's going to change the game, and how are you coaching your returners to handle it?
I think the kickoff rule, I think it's a step in the right direction in terms of any new rule that we want to trot out there to try to enhance player safety. We're always going to support that. I do feel like, there's still going to be a lot of collisions on that play. Just because a guy does this does not mean our kickoff team is going to stop. Because if he muffs it, we better be there to fall on the dang thing. So there's still going to be a heck load of collisions on that team. But I do think it provides protection to the returner himself from a guy that maybe a guy whiffs his block early and this guy's got a 40-yard head of steam coming in to just clean his clock. That our rule right now is going to be obviously game plan based. If they've got an elite cover team, then any ball probably caught within the 5 is going to be fair caught. If they've got an average one, we'll probably leave it up to the discretion of the returner based on hang time. And if they've got a below average one, we'll probably tell them if it's not a touchback, we want to return most of them. So it's going to be very game plan dependent.
Is that a new skill you got to teach the guys?
A little bit, yeah, but they're pretty savvy.
Coach, a name that hasn't come up in these settings as much as maybe last year's Malcolm Roach. I'm just curious where he's made the biggest step and kind of how big the impact he can have on your defense this year.
Versatility. I mean, we are literally, guys, we're talking about a 6'2", 282-pound middle linebacker. And so that we have no hesitation putting him at middle linebacker because he can run around, he can bend, he can move, he can shed blocks. And, you should see that, like, when he's the running back's responsibility in pass protection and he blitzes and the C parts and he's coming at, this poor running back full speed, and it's like, it's like asking a running back to block a 3 technique in pass protection. You wouldn't do that. So his versatility is off the charts. He's really, really matured as a leader. He has said some things in team meetings and in front of the team out on the field that, he sounds like a coach, which is not surprising based on the fact that his dad is a coach and he grew up in that environment. But, this is a guy that went from, kind of the lovable jokester in the locker room to being the mature leader that deserves to be on our leadership council. And, so he can play, the middle linebacker, he can play our outside linebacker. He could, in a pinch, we could put his hand down and let him play defensive end. He can rush the passer. He can drop in zone. He's just extremely versatile. But I think the biggest area of improvement for him has been his maturity and leadership.
All right, Coach. All right, you might say this does not matter, but are you calling plays this year, or is Tim Beck going to be calling plays?
We'll all be calling plays on offense.
Okay, can you just explain what went into that decision?
It's the same that went into the decision last year. Again, there is not a play that gets called or suggested that does not have veto power by the head football coach, Tom Herman. So I will be in charge of making sure that the plays that are run or the plays that we feel as an offensive staff are the ones that will be the most successful in said situation. So who's saying deuce right up, zone left is irrelevant. It's really irrelevant. The responsibility of the offense and its performance ultimately lies with me.
Tom, your punter last year was extraordinary, obviously, Ray Guy Award winner.
How good is it to see him, what he's doing in the pros, too?
Killing it. Where is your punting situation at this point? And then what did you learn about your young guys, Josh Moore and Deshaun Jameson? How much do you think they can handle in terms of playing time right away?
The punting situation, when you lose the best punter in college football, who then, as you know, through 4 weeks of preseason is pretty undisputedly the best punter in the National Football League, and some might argue the best punter maybe in the history of college football. I would argue, again, I'm old school, but there was a guy that played at that other school out east named Shane Leckler that was pretty damn good too. So, but you know, to be in that conversation, which I think he is, you're not going to be as good right away. Does our current punter have the ability to be? Yeah, we feel good. And he's continued to get better and better. He has gotten much more comfortable with bodies in his face, and I think he'll be just fine. Is it going to be, you know, 49-yard average fine with, you know, half your punts down inside the 10? Probably not, but it'll be good enough to win. And then the two young slots, they're going to play. Josh Moore is extremely fluid. Got great ball skills, really football smart, understands route running, understands leverage. Deshaun's a little bit more raw when it comes to that, just because he hasn't played that position but for 4 weeks. But what he lacks in experience at that position, he might be the best open field runner on our team right now. So we're going to try to get him the ball in space a little bit and see what he can do. But both those guys should play.
You said that there are freshmen who have earned playing time. Obviously, Caden Stearns is one of those guys. How has he developed since you first saw him in the spring?
Just keeps getting better. I think with him, it was never a physical issue. Was never a want-to issue. Was never a tackling issue. It was a knowing the defense issue, and he's put on 10 pounds since he's got here. He feels good. He's always, since he's been here, he's thrown his body around. He's got unbelievable ball skills, and so I think his biggest development has been just the knowledge and comfortability within the defense.
Coach, what's the biggest concern you have about Maryland, and are you glad that this game is in a pro football stadium versus a college football stadium?
I'd be more glad if it was at home. In the last 22 years, the University of Texas has played 2 road games to open the season, and one of them was a road game at NRG Stadium against Rice, and the other being the one at Notre Dame a few years back. And we are also one of only 2 schools in college football in the last 2 years in a row have played 11 Power 5 opponents in 1 year. So it is what it is. I'm not complaining, certainly. We can't change it, so we might as well figure out a way to do it. But I think it'll be neat for the kids. You asked about the Pro Stadium. We're going to do things something a little bit differently. Normally we have our Family Friday walkthrough and games. On road games, we'll do them in our stadium, get on a plane, land the plane, and go straight to the hotel for meetings and dinner, and then our Family Friday evening events, which are card games and dominoes and watching movies and all that stuff. But, and so the first time these guys actually go, or had been in the past, go to the visiting stadium would have been Saturday morning when we get there. But we're going to go early Friday morning, and we're going to have our walkthrough and our Family Friday kind of on-field games at FedEx Field, so that our guys can get the ooh and ah of playing in a pro stadium, maybe a little bit out of their system. We did the same thing when we played at NRG a couple years ago when we were at Houston and played Oklahoma. We did all of our Friday activities at NRG just so our guys could get the feel. And it's different too, because the pro numbers are in a different place, the pro hashes are in a different place, so you have to adjust to, hey, I know that says because all of our splits by our receivers are based off landmarks on the field, and the pro numbers are a lot farther inside than they are the college numbers, and usually they'll have little tick marks where the college numbers should be, and so our receivers got to get adjusted to the spacing and all that. So our guys are really excited about playing, and I think they're excited about doing their Friday walkthrough at the stadium as well.
I have a follow-up to Anwar's question. I can understand, and we all can understand what you're saying about Tim, but
what am I saying about Tim?
That everyone is involved in play calling, and that you ultimately have veto power.
So what does that have to do with Tim?
No, I get that, and my question is that the minute this offense gets a hangnail, fans are going to blame the play caller in Texas, because that's what they do, right?
Then I'm fans. The minute this offense gets a hangnail, okay, blame me and the entire offensive staff.
That's actually what I was going at, because it was wrong to blame Vance because it was Charlie's defense. Charlie was the head coach; he was the defensive guy.
I don't know anything about that.
No, but you're doing the same thing, which I think is you're the head coach. You should be take responsibility. That's good. So you're totally. And what I'm getting to, stop it, Kirk, is that when you see the criticism on Tim, is that just the way it goes in this profession?
Huh?
Is that just the way it goes in this profession?
Yeah, I got criticized at Ohio State. And my boss took up for me. I got criticized at Iowa State at times, and my boss took up for me. Major Applewhite got criticized at times, and I took up for him because it's unfair. It is absolutely unfair. And this is, again, game plans are formulated throughout the week and throughout the off season, and there is an immense amount of collaboration in between series, and of what we want to see the next series of adjustments that we need to make based on what we're seeing, especially in game ones, because there's no identity, right? You assume you're going to get something similar to what you got last year, but who knows? There could be something completely different, and you need to adjust. And so, so that type of collaboration is extremely commonplace. I mean, there isn't. This is Texas's offense. This isn't Tim Beck's offense, And just like it was Houston's offense and not Major Applewhite's offense, and it was Ohio State's offense and not Tom Herman's offense. That's not how it works in college football. It really doesn't. I don't know if the pros are different. Maybe they are. Maybe they're hired guns and they come in and they bring in their own offense, and all the assistants, they just, I guess, play cards during the day and show up to babysit their players at practice, and the offensive coordinator hands them a game plan and says, hey, this is what we're going to do, and then everybody stays silent on the headset on game day and this guy just calls the plays, but that's not the way it works in college football. And the two voices that will be heard throughout a series on a play-by-play basis will be mine and Tim Beck's.
Two last ones, Mike in the back and then Roger. Tom, a lot of off-the-field distractions for both teams this week. First of all, how do you handle your players for that? And with Maryland, have you ever played a team with a similar coaching situation, just not having their head coach as you're having this week?
We've had 0 off-the-field distractions, so I don't know what for both teams is referring to. But again, we just talked to them. This is a team in Maryland that they don't think they can beat you. They know they can beat you because they have. And there's a lot of guys on that team at Maryland that know that they've beaten Texas. And so I don't think there's any, and they've got 85 guys on scholarship. They've got really, really, really good players, really good players. That was very evident last year. They've got a lot of team speed. They've got a lot of physicality on defense. And so to assume that just because they've had some issues in their program that they're not going to show up, they're going to show up. And they're going to show up not just thinking they can beat us, but knowing that they can. And so I don't think there has been 0 talk about that in our program other than the fact that you better be ready for a dogfight versus a really good Power 5 opponent.
Yeah, Tom, along those lines with their quarterback, you saw both, and then unfortunately for them, they both were lost for the season. But what do you see with, looks like Hill may be the guy, but if not Pigram, the challenges with those two guys?
Their feet, you got to contain them. It's interesting because you knew, Walt Bell, the offensive coordinator last year, great young offensive coordinator that got a job at Florida State and is now the offensive coordinator there at Florida State. You kind of knew it was going to be this spread, kind of very similar to what we do, a spread run attack using the quarterback in the run game. And so now you're a little bit unsure. You've got an offensive coordinator that has an MO, that has a philosophy, and you try to study what he did at LSU, you try to study what he did at Pittsburgh, you try to study what he did at NC State, but at the same time he's inheriting a personnel, especially at the quarterback position, that's suited for maybe something a little bit different. And so you have to take some educated guesses a little bit on what you're going to see. You've got to study the spring game as much as you can. I know, just like us, I'm sure they were very, very vanilla, on the spring game. In fact, I think they actually might have even called a receiver in to have to run the ball in for a touchdown on the 2-yard line because they wanted to be so vanilla. I'm not sure. I can't remember that one. But it's going to be a bit of an unknown, but we're going to have to be prepared for 2 very, very athletic quarterbacks.